Please, let me go!
You must come with us. It is the law. Do not...
Sakwae!
Silence!
No! Unhand me!
You will come with us.
Unhand me!
When you picture an ancient Roman wedding, what comes to mind? Probably a scene straight out of a movie. Beautiful white togas, flower garlands, lavish feasts, and two families joyfully uniting. History books often paint a picture of Roman marriage as a very organized, even businesslike affair, a cornerstone of their civilized society. But beneath this polished surface lies a tradition that the Romans themselves were surprisingly quiet about, a part of the ceremony that was far from the calm, orderly event we imagine. I'm talking about the wedding night. The celebration would begin, as expected, with a massive feast at the bride's family home. But as evening approached, the mood would shift dramatically. This is when the ritual known as raptio would begin. A group of the groom's friends would stage a mock abduction of the bride, violently tearing her from her mother's arms. It was meant to look like a struggle, with the bride crying out and her mother resisting. This wasn't just a bit of fun. It was a deeply symbolic act, echoing the legendary founding of Rome itself, the infamous tale of the rape of the Sabine women. For the Romans, this staged violence was a necessary, almost sacred part of transitioning a girl from her father's household to her husband's. After the dramatic abduction, the wedding procession would light their torches and begin the journey to the groom's house. This wasn't a quiet walk. It was a loud, rowdy, and often chaotic parade. The crowd would sing traditionally, often very explicit and teasing songs, known as fescennine verses. Think of it as an ancient Roman bachelorette party and a public announcement rolled into one, but with a lot more shouting. As they marched through the streets, the groom would throw nuts, similar to how we throw rice or confetti today. This symbolized leaving behind the frivolities of childhood and embracing the responsibilities of marriage. It was a public spectacle, ensuring the entire neighborhood knew a wedding was taking place. Upon arriving at her new home, the bride performed several important rituals. She would anoint the doorposts with oil and wool, symbolizing her new role as the mistress of the household. But she wouldn't just walk through the door. In a tradition meant to bring good luck and perhaps to prevent her from terrible omen, the groom would lift her over the threshold. Once inside, he would present her with fire and water, the essential elements for managing a Roman home. She was then led to the marital bed, the lectus genialis, which was beautifully decorated and placed prominently in the main hall, or atrium. This wasn't a private bedroom. It was a public statement. Now, this is where things get even more interesting and very different from our modern ideas of privacy. The wedding night itself wasn't a private affair. While the couple consummated the marriage, friends and family would gather right outside the bedroom door. They would continue to sing those loud, bawdy songs, their voices filling the house. The purpose of this was twofold. First, it was believed to ward off evil spirits, but more practically, the noise was meant to drown out any sounds coming from the bedroom, particularly the cries of a young, likely terrified bride. The next morning, the bride would appear for the first time dressed as a matrona, a married woman, ready to begin her new life, leaving the strange, noise. When you think of a Roman wedding, what comes to mind? Maybe a grand ceremony, flowing white togas, and declarations of eternal love. Well, let's hit pause on that romantic movie scene for a second. The truth is, for most of ancient Rome, marriage had very little to do with romance. It was all about business, politics. Forget love at first sight. Think more like a strategic merger. So, why get married in Rome if it wasn't for love? The first big reason was property. Marriage was the primary way to legally transfer wealth and secure assets. Imagine two powerful families. A marriage between their children wasn't just a union of two people. It was a union of two fortunes. Lands, businesses, and inheritances were all on the negotiating table. The dowry a bride brought with her was a massive deal. It wasn't just a wedding gift. It was a serious financial investment that could make or break a family's status. Who inherited what was a question answered not by a will, but by a wedding certificate. It was the ultimate financial contract. Next up, family alliances. In a society built on intricate social networks, who you were related to mattered a lot. Marriage was the glue that held these networks together. A well-placed marriage could connect a lesser-known family to a powerful clan, opening doors to opportunities they could only dream of before. It was like gaining a backstage pass to the elite circles of Roman society. These alliances provided protection, offered business advantages, and ensured that you had powerful friends to call on when things got tough. The more influential your in-laws, the more secure your own family's position became. It was social climbing at its most strategic. And that brings us to the biggest prize of all: political power. In the high-stakes world of Roman politics, marriages were the ultimate power play. Ambitious men would strategically marry into families that could advance their careers. A senator might marry his daughter to a promising general to secure military backing. A rising politician might marry the daughter of a respected elder statesman to gain legitimacy and influence. Think of it like this: every marriage was a calculated move on a giant chessboard. The goal wasn't a happy home. It was a seat in the Senate, a governorship of a province, or even a shot at becoming emperor. Famous figures like Julius Caesar and Augustus used marriages masterfully to forge alliances, neutralize rivals, and consolidate their power. Their family trees look more like a political flowchart than a sentimental keepsake. Now, this doesn't mean love was completely absent from Roman life. We find love poems and heartfelt letters from the period, so we know people did fall in love. But these feelings were often seen as separate from the institution of marriage. Love was a personal, private emotion, while marriage was a public, practical duty. You married for your family, for your future, for your status. If you were lucky, you might grow to love, or at least respect, the person you were tied to. But it was rarely the starting point. The primary function of marriage was to produce legitimate children, to continue the family line and inherit the property and status that the union had secured. So, the next time you hear about ancient Rome, remember that their idea of tying the knot was less about a hearts and flowers affair and more about tying together fortunes, families, and political dynasties. It was a complex system designed to maintain social order and structure. A world where a wedding invitation was less about celebrating love and more about witnessing a strategic masterpiece. It is a fascinating look at how society can be built on very different. Ever wondered what the wedding night was like for ancient Romans? Forget everything you think you know, because it was a world away from our modern ideas of privacy and romance. For Romans, the wedding night wasn't just a private moment between two people. It was a public spectacle, a crucial social ritual that solidified the entire marriage. So, let's set the scene. The wedding day itself was a huge celebration, filled with feasts, music, and processions. The bride, often just a teenager, would be ceremoniously torn from her mother's arms, a symbolic act showing her transition from her father's family to her husband's. Then came a loud and rowdy torchlit parade through the streets, leading the bride to her new home. Friends, family, and even curious onlookers would join in, singing bawdy songs and shouting jokes. This wasn't a quiet, dignified affair. It was a community event, and everyone was invited. When the procession finally reached the groom's house, the bride would be carried over the threshold. This wasn't just to be romantic, it was to prevent her from stumbling, which was considered a terrible omen. Once inside, the festivities continued. The house would be packed with guests, and the bride would be led to the marriage bed, the lectus genialis, which was beautifully decorated and placed right in the main hall, or atrium, for everyone to see. There was no concept of a private bedroom for this occasion. Now, this is where it gets really different. The bride and groom would be accompanied to the marriage bed by their mothers and other married female relatives. These women, known as pronubai, would be there to offer advice, support, and to literally witness the consummation of the marriage. That's right, the first moments of the couple's physical union weren't private at all. The guests would wait just outside the room, or even in the same hall, continuing the party. They'd sing, cheer, and wait for the proof. Why was this public display so important? It all came down to two things: completion and legitimacy. In Roman society, a marriage wasn't considered fully complete or legally binding until it was consummated. This public witnessing served as undeniable proof that the union had been sealed. It wasn't about love or passion in the way we see it. It was a practical, legal necessity. This act confirmed the legitimacy of any future children. in a world without DNA tests. Having respected witnesses was the only way to ensure that the heir was truly the groom's. This protected family lineage, property rights, and inheritance. It was a social contract being fulfilled in front of the community. The bride's virginity was also a key part of this, symbolizing her purity and guaranteeing the bloodline. The next morning, the bride would appear in the clothes of a married woman, a matrona, and the bed sheets might even be displayed as proof of her virginity and the marriage's consummation. So, while our modern sensibilities might find the Roman wedding night shocking, for them it was a logical and essential part of life. It was a community affair that reinforced social order, secured family lines, and publicly declared the formation of a new household. It is a fascinating glimpse into a world where the line between public and private life was drawn very differently than it is today. Thanks for watching, and if you found this interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into history. Have you ever wondered what a wedding night was really like for the ancient Romans? We often see glamorous depictions in movies, but the reality for some Roman families was far more structured and, well, a little less spontaneous. Let's dive into a fascinating ritual that took place right at the heart of the wedding celebration. Picture this. The party is over. The guests have gone home, and the newlyweds are finally alone. Or are they? For many young brides, this moment wasn't one of private intimacy, but a carefully guided introduction to married life. Instead of being left to their own devices, the bride would be accompanied by a group of older, experienced married women, often her mother and other close female relatives. These women were known as the asterisk, pronubai asterisk. Their role was crucial. They weren't just there for moral support. They were there to instruct. This wasn't a casual chat. It was a formal process, a transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. These matrons would guide the young bride through the expected behaviors and duties of a Roman wife, particularly concerning the wedding night itself. Think of it as a very serious, hands-on orientation session for marriage. Why was this necessary? You have to remember that many Roman brides were incredibly young, sometimes just in their early teens. They often had very little, if any, education about intimacy or the physical aspects of marriage. Marriages were typically arranged for political or financial reasons, so the bride and groom might barely know each other. This ritual was designed to ease the bride's transition, reduce her anxiety, and ensure the marriage was consummated according to tradition and social expectation. The guidance provided by the asterisk, pronubai asterisk, was steeped in tradition and strict rules of behavior. It was about ensuring the bride conducted herself with modesty and dignity, upholding her family's honor. The focus was on duty and procreation. The primary goal of a Roman marriage was to produce legitimate heirs to continue the family line. So, the instructions would have been practical and direct, centered on fulfilling this wifely obligation. It was less about romance and more about responsibility. This wasn't just about the bride, either. The groom also had expectations to live up to. While he wouldn't have a group of men in the room with him, he was expected to act with a certain degree of gentleness and respect, understanding the bride's likely innocence and nervousness. The whole event was a public affair in a private setting, with the family's reputation on the line. The success of the wedding night was seen as a predictor for the success of the marriage and the continuation of the family legacy. So, while we might imagine a romantic scene, the reality for some Romans was a carefully managed, ritualistic event. It highlights a stark difference in cultural attitudes towards marriage, privacy, and intimacy. It was a system designed to maintain social order and ensure the smooth continuation of family lines, where personal feelings often took a backseat to familial duty. It is a fascinating glimpse into a world where even the most private moments were governed by tradition and community Have you ever wondered about those ancient wedding traditions that seem a bit intense? We often picture historical weddings as grand ceremonies, but what happened after the party ended? Well, in many cultures throughout history, the wedding night wasn't exactly a private affair. Let's talk about the role of the symbolic witness. Now, this might sound strange to our modern ears, but in some societies, it was customary for people to be present during, or at least just outside, the wedding chamber. But they weren't there to watch in a voyeuristic way. Their purpose was far more official and deeply rooted in social structure. These witnesses often trusted women from the family like the bride's mother. Aunts, or respected female elders, had a crucial job. Their first and most important duty was to confirm that the marriage was actually consummated. In an era before official marriage certificates and digital records, the physical union was the ultimate seal on the marriage contract. This was especially vital for royal and noble families, where alliances, property, and lines of succession were at stake. Without confirmation of consummation, the marriage could potentially be, which could lead to political chaos, broken treaties, and family disputes. So, the witness served as living proof that the deal was done. The alliance was solid, and any future children would be legitimate heirs. Secondly, these witnesses were there to ensure that all social rules and traditions were followed. Every culture had its own specific set of rituals and expectations for the wedding night. The witnesses acted as guardians of these traditions, making sure everything was done correctly, from the symbolic rituals leading up to the act to the proper conduct of the newlyweds. Their presence reinforced the community's values and ensured the marriage started on the right, socially approved foot. It was a way of saying, this union isn't just about two people. It's about two families and the entire community. And thirdly, a perhaps more somber reason was to confirm the bride's consent, or at least her lack of resistance. In many historical contexts, women had very little agency, and marriages were often arranged. The presence of trusted female relatives was meant to provide a semblance of protection. They were there to ensure the bride was not being forced against her will in a violent or unacceptable manner. While our modern concept of consent is very different, this was an early, albeit imperfect, system of oversight. It was a check against outright brutality and a way to signal that while the marriage was arranged, the bride was now a part of her new family and was to be treated with a certain level of respect according to the customs of the time. So, when we look back at this tradition of symbolic witnesses, it's not just a quirky or uncomfortable historical fact. It reveals a lot about what societies valued: the legitimacy of heirs, the importance of community and tradition over individual privacy, and the complex social dynamics surrounding marriage, power, and family. It shows us how societies created systems to verify and legitimize one of life's most important contracts in a world very different from our own. What do you think about this old tradition? It's fascinating how customs... Have you ever wondered what life was really like for women in ancient Rome? We often see dramatic portrayals in movies, but the reality for many was far from glamorous. From the moment a Roman girl was born, her life was shaped by one core principle: obedience. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was the foundation of her entire existence, woven into every aspect of her upbringing. Imagine growing up in a world where your primary purpose was to be a dutiful daughter, then a loyal wife, and finally, a respectable mother. For Roman girls, education wasn't about expanding their minds for personal growth. Instead, it was a practical curriculum designed to mold them into the perfect matriarch of a household. They learned to spin wool, manage slaves, and oversee the domestic sphere. These skills were essential, not just for running a home, but for upholding the family's honor and reputation. A well-managed household was a direct reflection of the husband's status, and the wife was the silent architect of that success. Their training in obedience was constant. They were taught to be modest in their dress, quiet in their speech, and respectful in their demeanor. Public life was the domain of men. A respectable woman's place was at home, away from the political intrigue and social chaos of the Roman Forum. Her world was the Domus, the family home, and her influence was exercised subtly within its walls. This conditioning from childhood was a deliberate process to prepare them for their ultimate role: marriage. Now, let's talk about the wedding day. For us, it's a celebration of love and partnership. For a Roman girl, who was often just a teenager, it was a profound and intimidating transition. She would leave her family home, her childhood gods, and everything she'd ever known, to join her husband's household. The wedding ceremony itself was rich with symbolism. The bride would wear a special tunic, her hair parted into 6 locks, and a bright orange veil. A procession would lead her to her new home, with friends and family singing and carrying torches. But it's the wedding night, the consummation of the marriage, that truly highlights the immense pressure and expectation placed upon her. This wasn't seen as a romantic encounter, but as a civic and familial duty. The primary goal of marriage in Roman society was to produce legitimate heirs to continue the family line. So, on this night, all her years of training and obedience were put to the ultimate test. 3 key expectations were placed upon her. First, She was expected to follow her husband's instructions without question. This was the culmination of her lifelong lesson in submission. Resistance or hesitation would have been seen as a shocking defiance of her wifely duties and a stain on her family's honor. Her body was no longer her own. It was now part of a contract to serve her husband and his lineage. Second, she was expected to remain silent. Any expression of fear, discomfort, or personal desire was not part of the equation. Silence was equated with modesty and virtue. Her role was to be a passive recipient, a vessel for the continuation of the family. This silence was a powerful symbol of her acceptance of this new, subservient role. It was the final, quiet transfer of authority from her father to her husband. And third, and perhaps most importantly, she had to accept her role. This was the moment she fully stepped into her identity as a matrona, a Roman wife. It wasn't just about the physical act. It was about the mental and emotional acceptance of her new life's purpose. She was now bound to her husband, tasked with managing his home and bearing his children. Her personal hopes and dreams, if she had any, were now secondary to these new responsibilities. It's a stark and sobering picture, isn't it? The life of a Roman woman was one of duty, honor, and immense pressure, while some women, particularly in the upper classes, managed to find ways to exert influence and power. The fundamental expectation of obedience was a constant thread running through their lives. Understanding this helps us see beyond the marble statues and grand amphitheaters to the real, human stories of the people who lived in this ancient world. Imagine your wedding day. You're probably picturing romance, excitement, and a celebration of love. But for countless women throughout history, the wedding night wasn't a moment of joy. It was a moment of profound fear. Forget everything you see in movies. For many brides, there was no choice, no voice, and certainly no concept of consent as we understand it today. Let's peel back the layers of romanticism and look at the stark reality. For centuries, marriage was less about love and more about property and politics. A woman was often seen as a commodity, an asset to be transferred from her father's household to her husband's. Her value was tied to her dowry, her fertility, and her family's social standing. The wedding ceremony was, in essence, a legal and financial transaction. Her feelings, they were rarely part of the equation. When the celebrations ended and the doors to the bridal chamber closed, a bride was often left alone with a man she barely knew, or in some cases, had never even met before the wedding. She had been raised to be obedient, first to her father, then to her husband. The idea of refusing her husband's advances was not just unthinkable, it was legally impossible. In many legal systems, the concept of marital rape simply didn't exist. The law viewed a wife's consent as permanently given at the moment of marriage. She became her husband's property, and he had a legal right to her body. This wasn't a dirty secret. It was a widely accepted social and legal norm. This legal framework left women completely vulnerable. There was no one to turn to, no law to protect them. Voicing fear or reluctance could be met with confusion, anger, or even violence, all sanctioned by the society they lived in. Think about the psychological impact. A young woman, often a teenager, thrust into an intimate situation without any say in the matter. She had no education about her own body, no understanding of intimacy beyond what she was expected to provide. Her wedding night was a duty to be performed, a consummation required to legitimize the marriage and secure the transfer of property. The fear of the unknown, the fear of pain, and the fear of a complete stranger was a silent burden many brides carried. This wasn't just a grim reality of the distant past. It's a reality that persisted for far longer than we'd like to admit. The legal and social structures that stripped women of their bodily autonomy took centuries to dismantle. In many parts of the world, echoes of this system still remain. The fight for a woman's right to choose, to consent, and to have a voice heard within a marriage is a relatively recent chapter in human history. So, the next time we see a historical drama with a romanticized wedding night, it's worth remembering the millions of silent stories behind the fiction. The stories of fear, of duty, and of a profound lack of power. It is a powerful reminder of how far we've come in recognizing that marriage should be a partnership of equals, built on respect, love, and enthusiastic consent. Understanding this history isn't about casting blame. It is about appreciating the rights we have today and continuing to advocate for those who are still fighting for their voices to be heard. Thank you for watching. If you found this perspective interesting, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. See you next time.